Adrian and Sophia were the envy of everyone in the high-end neighborhoods of Silvercrest City. Their marriage had all the sparkle one would expect from a couple who seemed predestined for greatness. Adrian, with his jet-black hair and charismatic confidence, ran a successful tech company specializing in cutting-edge software. Sophia, an elegant woman who had once dreamed of becoming a journalist, devoted herself entirely to supporting her husband's ambitions. They hosted lavish parties every other weekend at their ultramodern penthouse, which overlooked the city's sparkling skyline. Guests marveled at the marble floors, the sculptures imported from Italy, and the glass chandeliers that refracted light into rainbow shards. More impressive than the decor, however, was how Adrian and Sophia appeared completely in sync, finishing each other's sentences and exchanging affectionate glances. On a Wednesday evening, they threw another splendid gathering. The most powerful figures in the city's tech, real estate, and banking sectors mingled in their living room. Sophia, graceful in a simple black cocktail dress, held a tray of champagne flutes for their guests. Adrian, wearing a sharply tailored suit, stepped away from a conversation with an investor and approached her. His voice brimmed with pride. "Everyone's raving about this event, Soph," he said, taking a flute from the tray. She smiled. "I'm glad they're enjoying themselves. But I couldn't do any of this without you." It was a line she often repeated. She meant every word. Adrian's drive and creativity had paved the way for an extraordinary life. And yet, in her eyes, he was more than a visionary CEO. He was her partner and soulmate. She believed their relationship rested on the kind of love that could weather any storm. But under the surface, small cracks had already begun to form, ones that Sophia, in her boundless optimism, hadn't noticed. Adrian's charming demeanor had begun to evolve into a restless ambition. While Sophia was content with love, family, and modest successes, Adrian craved power and prestige above all else. In the light of their glamorous home, no one saw his growing discontent. No one except perhaps the man himself, who kept it buried under layers of self-assuredness. Sophia, oblivious to these undercurrents, was filled with the promise of the future. After all, with Adrian by her side, how could anything go wrong? A month after the party, Sophia woke up one morning feeling a curious sensation in her stomach. She initially brushed it off as stress. She'd been busy planning another fundraising gala. But a few days later, as the nausea persisted, she decided to take a pregnancy test. When the result emerged positive, she experienced a rush of elation and nervous excitement. She imagined sharing the news with Adrian, seeing his eyes light up with fatherly pride. That evening, she prepared a special dinner, a simple recipe of roasted salmon and asparagus, Adrian's favorite. She set the table with fresh flowers and their finest silverware. The moment Adrian stepped through the door, she could barely contain herself. "Welcome home," she said, practically glowing. "I have some wonderful news." Adrian's eyes darted to the table, then back to her. "This looks nice. What's the occasion?" She led him to his seat and handed him a small box tied with a ribbon. Inside was a pair of tiny baby shoes. He frowned, confusion etched on his face. As realization sank in, the color drained from his cheeks. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his tone more uneasy than happy. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling with both excitement and concern. "We're going to have a baby, Adrian." He pulled his hand away from hers. Instead of the warm embrace or joyous smile Sophia had hoped for, Adrian appeared irritated. His posture stiffened as if someone had dropped a weight onto his shoulders. This isn't part of my plan," he said bluntly. "The company is at a critical juncture. A baby is going to be a huge distraction." Her heart sank. She forced a smile, hoping it was just initial shock. "We'll figure it out. We have resources, and I can adjust my schedule to handle more at home if you need to travel for business." Adrian's jaw clenched, and he hardly touched the meal she'd prepared. Sophia tried to steer the conversation toward optimism, talking about the beautiful nursery she imagined creating, how they could hire help, and the joy a child might bring to their home. But Adrian's replies were clipped, and she saw him become increasingly withdrawn. In that moment, She felt a strange chill crawl down her spine. For the first time in her life, she realized that the warm, supportive partner she believed Adrian to be might be slipping away, drawn into a sense of resentment she had no idea how to dispel. In the weeks that followed, Adrian's attitude hardened. He stayed out late, often claiming he had emergency meetings or urgent calls with international clients. Sophia wanted to believe him, but each time he returned home, the faint scent of perfume and the lipstick smudges on his collar told a different story. One night, she confronted him in their living room. The large windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, but all Sophia felt was darkness creeping into her world. "Adrian," she began, voice quivering. "I know you're not at the office these nights. Where are you going?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't have to explain every second of my life to you, Sophia." She set her jaw, trying not to cry. "I'm carrying your child. At least respect me enough to be honest." He let out a scornful laugh. "Oh, so now you're pulling the guilt card? How convenient. You think you could trap me in this marriage with a baby?" Her eyes widened in horror. "Trap you? We're married, Adrian. We talked about having a family one day." His shoulders tensed. "Maybe you talked about it. I never signed up for this right now. I'm on the cusp of making a major deal in my business. A baby, that's going to drag me down." He turned to leave the room, but she grabbed his arm. "Adrian, we can find a way to make this work. I love you. I still love you." He shrugged her off, eyes cold. "Sophia, love isn't enough. I need progress, growth, freedom. There are people out there who actually support my ambitions without demanding a complete lifestyle change." As he stormed out, Sophia sunk onto the couch, tears streaming. She looked around at their plush surroundings, the brand new furniture, the art pieces selected so carefully, the sophisticated design that once symbolized their shared success. Now it felt empty. The perfect life she believed in was no more than a fragile illusion. In the days that followed, she noticed Adrian spending more time with a young, attractive woman named Vanessa, a socialite rumored to be seeking a wealthy, influential partner. Whispers circulated among their acquaintances, and Sophia felt shame engulf her every time someone gave her a pitying look. She tried to cling to hope, but Adrian's emotional distance and late-night disappearances painted a grim reality. He was moving on without her. 2 weeks later, on a stormy night, Sophia sat on their king-sized bed, anxiously awaiting Adrian's return. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the bedroom walls in quick bursts. She glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. She clutched her phone, willing it to ring, wishing Adrian would at least message her to say he was safe. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Adrian burst in, smelling of alcohol and perfume. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and he looked at Sophia with the expression one might give an unwelcome stranger. "Are you drunk?" she asked, worry mingling with anger. "Not drunk enough to deal with this," he slurred, throwing his keys onto the nightstand. Then, with no preamble, he said words that shattered her world. "I want a divorce." Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. She stood up, hand instinctively on her belly. "Adrian, what are you saying?" Why would you?" He cut her off. "I've filed the papers already. You'll get them in a day or so." He ran a hand over his face in frustration. "Vanessa makes me feel alive. She supports my business ideas without tying me down. I'm done pretending here." Tears slipped down Sophia's cheeks. "We took vows. For better or worse, remember? We built a life, a home." He scoffed. "That was before you decided to change everything with this baby. I told you I don't want to be a father. Not now. Maybe never." Her voice cracked. But I love you." He paused, eyes flickering with something akin to regret, or maybe just exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I just can't do this anymore." In a single moment, all the hopes and dreams she'd once cherished collapsed. The howling wind outside rattled the windows, as if nature itself was lamenting her heartbreak. She clung to the edge of the bed to keep herself upright, her mind spinning at the cruelty of his words. Adrian stared at her for a moment longer, then turned and left the room, shutting the door with a finality that echoed through her soul. Less than a week after Adrian's announcement, Sophia found herself on the front steps of their penthouse, holding a small suitcase and a growing baby bump. Adrian had demanded she leave immediately. The locks were changed, security was instructed not to let her in, and he had frozen their shared accounts, leaving her virtually penniless. He refused to offer any financial support, citing their prenuptial agreement. "You'll have to figure it out on your own," he said coldly, shoving her out the door. "I have no interest in playing husband or father." Standing in the hallway, Sophia trembled with anger and sorrow. She pressed a hand to her stomach, silently apologizing to her unborn child for the father who had forsaken them. Downstairs, the doorman avoided meeting her gaze. He had likely been told to remain discreet, but she could see the pity in his eyes. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Adrian's lawyer, confirming that the divorce papers had been filed and that Adrian intended to contest any request for spousal support. Outside, the city had never felt so oppressive. She paced the sidewalk, scanning through her contacts, desperate to find somewhere to go. Friends? Most of them were actually Adrian's business associates. Family? Her parents had passed away years ago, and she had no siblings. The sudden realization of how isolated Adrian had kept her made her feel unbearably alone. Tears blurred her vision as she hailed a taxi. Her heart pounded as she gave the driver an address she had only recently looked up, a women's shelter on the outskirts of town. She held onto her suitcase tightly, every jolt of the car reminding her that this was her new reality. The future was an ominous blank, no money, no stable home, and a baby on the way. During the ride, she tried to call Adrian one last time, praying for even a shred of compassion. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. "Adrian," she whispered, tears choking her, "please, call me back. We can talk about this, try counseling, anything." She stopped, realizing the futility. "Please," she repeated, before ending the call. He never called back. Sophia arrived at the women's shelter in pouring rain. Lightning streaked across the sky, and thunder boomed in the distance. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, stepping into the modest building with stained walls and flickering lights. A kindly social worker named Gloria led Sophia to a small dormitory room filled with bunk beds. Several other women, each with their own harrowing stories, offered tentative smiles. The sense of shared struggle hung in the air, heavy but somehow comforting. Sophia knew she wasn't alone in her suffering. That knowledge granted her a sliver of hope. Later that night, with the dim overhead bulb casting weak shadows, she lay on a creaky bed, trying to find a position comfortable for her pregnant belly. She stared at the peeling paint on the ceiling. In one of the bunks nearby, a young mother hummed a lullaby to a fussy baby. Sophia let silent tears roll down her cheeks. She remembered the years she and Adrian spent decorating their penthouse, traveling for romantic getaways, discussing future children as an abstract possibility, one that would happen when the time was right. It had never occurred to her that the man who once promised to love and cherish her would so easily turn cruel. In the stillness of the night, she prayed. She prayed for strength, for her unborn child's health, and for a miracle that might save her from the spiral she found herself in. As thunder rumbled overhead, she resolved that if no miracle came, she would create one herself. No matter how many tears she shed, she couldn't let Adrian's betrayal destroy her. She had to fight for her future and for the life growing inside her. Morning light filtered through the barred windows of the shelter, and Sophia woke to the sounds of hushed conversations and clattering dishes from the communal kitchen. After a meager breakfast, she sat down with Gloria, the social worker, to discuss her options. "We have a few job leads posted on our bulletin board," Gloria said gently, handing Sophia a folder. "They're mostly entry-level positions, but it's a start." Sophia scanned the listings. Her resume boasted years of managerial experience, albeit unpaid, running her husband's social events and philanthropic efforts. But she had no formal job references besides Adrian's circle, none of whom would likely vouch for her now. She found a small note about a waitress position at a local diner. The pay was minimal, but it was something. She took a deep breath, steeled herself, and decided to go for it. The next day, Sophia arrived at the diner, wearing a borrowed blouse and slacks from the shelter's donation closet. The manager, an older woman named Martha, cast her a sympathetic look when she saw Sophia's belly. But rather than dismiss her, Martha nodded firmly. "We could use extra hands, especially during breakfast rush," she said, studying Sophia's determined expression. "If you can handle the strain with your pregnancy, the job is yours." Sophia tried not to cry from relief. "Thank you. I promise I'll work as hard as anyone else." Within days, she found herself juggling orders, refilling coffee, and scrubbing tables. The work was tiring, but it gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Each tip she earned felt like a small victory toward independence. She saved every dollar, cutting back on everything she possibly could, mindful of the day she would have to leave the shelter and find a place of her own. At night, she wrote in a small notebook she kept under her pillow, her hopes, her worries, and sometimes her anger toward Adrian. She found that committing her thoughts to paper helped her remember she still had a future. She was determined to shape it herself. One late afternoon, Sophia was wiping down the diner's counter when a stately woman entered. She wore a tailored suit and carried herself with an air of confidence that drew every eye in the room. She chose a seat by the window, setting her crocodile leather bag aside. Sophia approached, greeting her warmly. "Welcome. Can I get you a menu?" The woman gave her a kind smile. "Yes, please. It's my first time here." Sophia handed over the menu and went to fetch water. As she returned, the woman observed her closely. "You seem quite efficient," she remarked. "This place is bustling, yet you've maintained a pleasant demeanor." Sophia shrugged, embarrassed. "I try my best." "Thank you." After the woman ordered a simple meal of a club sandwich and tea, she motioned for Sophia to sit across from her. It was against the diner's policy to sit with customers, but the woman's authoritative presence made it hard to refuse. "My name is Mrs. Charlotte Kingston," she said, offering a handshake. "I'm something of an investor, always looking for hardworking individuals with potential." Sophia placed the water down carefully. "I'm Sophia. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Kingston." Mrs. Kingston's gaze flickered to Sophia's belly, then back to her eyes. "You remind me of myself when I was young, determined, even under difficult circumstances. I have a proposition for you." Sophia's heart raced. She'd heard rumors of wealthy benefactors who sometimes assisted those in need, but it seemed too good to be true. "I'm listening," she replied cautiously. Mrs. Kingston leaned in. "I offer training programs for promising individuals, lessons in finance, marketing, leadership. I help them build businesses or become high-level consultants. If you prove yourself, I could help you secure funding for a startup. You shouldn't spend your life waiting tables." Sophia almost dropped the glass she was holding. "Why me?" Mrs. Kingston gave a confident smile. "Because I can sense your potential, dear. There's an unmistakable fire in your eyes. Think about it and contact me." She handed Sophia a sleek business card, rose from her seat, and placed several crisp bills on the table to cover her meal. Before leaving, she looked at Sophia one last time. "When you're ready to change your life, call me." That night, Sophia sat on her bunk bed at the shelter, holding Mrs. Kingston's business card between trembling fingers. Could this be real? She thought back to her life with Adrian, the comfort, the luxury. She had once taken for granted that she knew the ins and outs of event planning, budgeting, and people management. She'd helped Adrian polish presentations, sometimes even guiding him on how to pitch to investors. Perhaps she had overlooked her own talents in the process of supporting him. The following morning, heart-pounding, she dialed the number on the card. Mrs. Kingston answered, her poised voice echoing through the phone. "I'm ready," Sophia said. "If the offer still stands." Within days, Sophia began a rigorous training schedule at Mrs. Kingston's office suite. The environment was worlds away from the diner. Glass desks and sleek computers filled the space. Motivational quotes about ambition and resilience were framed on the walls. Sophia felt a buzz of energy the moment she stepped in. Mrs. Kingston introduced her to a team of mentors who specialized in finance, marketing, and leadership development. Her days became a blur of spreadsheets, online courses, and practice pitches. Even though she was visibly pregnant, she refused any special treatment, determined to master each lesson as quickly as possible. During lunch breaks, Mrs. Kingston would often invite Sophia to her office. "You'll need seed funding for your business," she'd say, reviewing Sophia's budding business plan. "But no investor will trust you if you don't trust yourself. Show them what you're made of." Sophia sometimes doubted her worth, haunted by Adrian's hurtful words, "A baby is a distraction. You're dragging me down." Yet every time these thoughts surfaced, she looked at her growing belly and remembered why she fought so hard. Her child deserved a strong mother, one unafraid to forge a new destiny. Step by step, fueled by grit and an eagerness to learn, Sophia grew into the role she had once only dreamed of. By the time her training period ended, Sophia had absorbed more than she ever thought possible about venture capital, real estate markets, and business strategy. She combined these newfound skills with her natural organizational talents and event planning experience to craft a bold vision, a real estate firm specializing in flipping undervalued properties into luxury rentals. Mrs. Kingston introduced Sophia to potential investors, but many were skeptical. "A pregnant woman with barely any net worth wants to start a real estate empire," some scoffed. Others simply frowned at her background, wondering how someone who came from a diner job and a battered marriage could compete in such a cutthroat industry. But Sophia refused to be deterred. She pitched tirelessly, refining her presentations and adapting to every question thrown her way. Eventually, a small group of forward-thinking investors, impressed by her passion and her meticulous research, agreed to back her first project. She launched her venture, Phoenix Heights, from a tiny rented office space. The name was a nod to rising from ashes. Her first major purchase, a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of the city, was considered a risky move. The location was rough and the building was old. Yet Sophia had done her homework. City redevelopment plans were in the works for that very neighborhood. Her small but dedicated team got to work, renovating units and advertising them on trendy rental platforms. Within months, the property's value skyrocketed. Tenants recognized that the once drab apartments now offered modern amenities, a safe environment, and easy access to the revitalized downtown. The success of that single building turned heads. News of the pregnant entrepreneur who had transformed a rundown complex made the rounds on business blogs. Investors who had once dismissed her began calling, eager to offer larger capital for her next projects. Sophia was no longer a fragile, abandoned wife. She was evolving into a formidable businesswoman, one who understood hardship and used it to drive her ambition. And unbeknownst to Adrian, her success was only just beginning. Despite working up until the final weeks of her pregnancy, Sophia managed to secure multiple real estate deals. After giving birth to a healthy baby boy named Leo, she took a brief pause, but her phone never stopped ringing. Investors wanted her perspective, news outlets asked for interviews, and larger development firms courted her for partnerships. When she returned to the office, baby Leo often came along, napping in a portable bassinet while Sophia balanced conference calls and site visits. Her employees admired her dedication, and some joked that Phoenix Heights had its tiniest CEO in training. Over the next 5 years, Sophia expanded her operations from basic property flips to high-end developments in luxury real estate. She diversified into tech investments, partnering with some up-and-coming startups. Soon, Phoenix Heights wasn't just a real estate firm. It had grown into a holding company with stakes in fashion, technology, and international property markets. At a prestigious gala, Sophia announced a major rebranding of her enterprise to Kingston Realty, honoring Mrs. Kingston's mentorship. Share prices soared, and industry experts buzzed about the woman who had seemingly come out of nowhere to become a major player across multiple sectors. One fateful morning, a key investor walked into Sophia's plush new headquarters. "Congratulations," he said, handing her official documents. "With your latest acquisitions, your net worth now exceeds $1 billion. Sophia's breath caught. She had spent countless hours studying, negotiating, and risking everything to prove her worth. And now, she held in her hands the tangible result of her unwavering resolve. But for Sophia, it wasn't just about the money, it was about vindication. The memory of standing on that sidewalk, pregnant and sobbing while Adrian forced her out, drove her to keep pushing her limits. She had channeled every ounce of pain into success. And now, she stood at the apex of a billion-dollar empire. Across town, Adrian's life had taken a radically different turn. Initially, he reveled in his newfound freedom with Vanessa, luxury vacations, extravagant purchases, and high-profile parties. But behind the scenes, Adrian's tech company struggled. Excess spending, poor investment decisions, and his neglect of daily operations opened the door for competitors to seize market share. Vanessa, lured by luxury, had no patience for downturns. She spent lavishly, draining Adrian's resources faster than he could replenish them. Board members grew alarmed, urging Adrian to tighten the budget and refocus on innovation. He ignored them, confident he could fix any financial hiccup. But by the time he acknowledged the severity of the situation, it was too late. Creditors lined up to collect debts, and investors threatened lawsuits. As the company teetered, Vanessa decided she'd had enough. She left Adrian for a wealthier entrepreneur, taking with her any shred of pride Adrian had left. The final blow came when the board voted to oust him as CEO, citing gross mismanagement. One evening, holed up in a modest apartment he never imagined he'd have to settle for, Adrian read about Sophia's meteoric rise. Her face graced the cover of a major financial magazine. She was now a billionaire, a titan in real estate and beyond. He stared at the photo in disbelief. The wife he had once deemed a burden, particularly because of a child he never wanted, was surpassing every success he had ever attained. A mix of envy and regret gnawed at him, and for the first time, he wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Adrian's debts piled high, and his newfound obscurity made it impossible to secure a bailout from his usual network. His last resort was to apply for a substantial loan, hoping to reboot his tech dreams. After weeks of pushing paperwork, he finally secured a meeting at a prestigious bank rumored to be backing many successful entrepreneurs. Arriving in a wrinkled suit, he felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when his attire was always custom-fitted. He was ushered into a glass-walled boardroom, sweaty palms gripping a portfolio of desperate business proposals. As he stood at the head of the table, the room fell silent. Slowly, the door at the opposite end opened, and in walked Sophia, exuding the same aura of power she had once admired in him. She took a seat at the center, her chin held high, flanked by various executives and advisors. Adrian's heart pounded in shock. "As Sophia," he stammered. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Adrian, meet Miss Sophia King," he paused. "I mean, Miss Sophia Kingston, the principal shareholder of this bank's holding company." Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Hello, Adrian." He swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't realize you owned this bank." Sophia offered a curt nod. "Yes. Through Kingston Realty's financial arm, I acquired a majority stake last quarter." Adrian's mind spun. Last quarter? She had accumulated enough wealth to buy a bank in a matter of months? The reality of her unstoppable rise finally hit him in full force, and it took every bit of willpower not to sink into a chair right then and there. The tension in the boardroom was palpable. Adrian struggled to present his proposal, his voice faltering. He had prepared slides that touted grandiose projects in artificial intelligence, but as he spoke, the faces around the table remained stoic. Finally, Sophia raised a hand to stop him. "I think we've heard enough." Adrian's breath caught. Desperation overtook him. "Look, Sophia, I understand this is awkward, but this project could be lucrative for the bank." She leaned back in her chair, eyes cold. "Lucrative? You mean like the way you left me out in the cold, pregnant and penniless, to chase your own idea of lucrative?" A few of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Adrian felt the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on him. He cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he managed, voice trembling. I regret everything. I never thought you'd become more successful than you." Sophia finished the sentence. "I know you never imagined this scenario. To be honest, neither did I. But here we are." He took a shaky breath. "Sophia, please. This loan could help me get back on my feet. I've lost everything." She watched him for a long moment. Adrian saw a flicker of pain, a memory of how things once were, but it was quickly replaced by the hardened gaze of someone who had been betrayed and had survived. Sophia turned to her advisors. "Any objections to denying this loan application?" They shook their heads in near unison. Adrian felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Panic seized him. "Sophia," he pleaded. "Please, I beg you. I'll do anything." A pin-drop silence enveloped the room. Adrian realized he was entirely at her mercy. Sophia stared at Adrian, remembering all the nights she'd cried, all the times she'd questioned her worth. She saw his hunched shoulders, his trembling fingers, an image so different from the arrogant man who once threw her out. Finally, she broke the silence. "I won't approve your loan." Adrian's eyes darkened. He opened his mouth to protest, but Sophia raised a hand. However, she continued, "There might be another way for you to earn the money you need, but not as a CEO. Not immediately." His brows knit in confusion. "What do you mean?" She exchanged a meaningful glance with the board members. Kingston Realty has a custodial division. We're always hiring for basic maintenance roles. A wave of shock swept across the room. Adrian's face paled. "Maintenance roles? You mean, like a janitor?" Sophia kept her face impassive. "Correct. Full-time, entry-level pay. You'll have an opportunity to learn the ropes from the ground up. Maybe, if you prove yourself over time, we can talk about a promotion. Perhaps an internal loan with a reasonable interest rate. But only if you show genuine effort." Adrian looked around the table. The board members wore expressions of stoic neutrality, unwilling to challenge their powerful boss. He was out of options. Every other financial institution had turned him away. This might be his only chance. With a trembling sigh, he nodded. "I'll do it." Sophia gave a curt smile. "Good. Report to HR tomorrow morning. Dress code. Uniform provided. No exceptions." She gathered her papers, her posture poised and regal. Meeting adjourned. In a matter of minutes, Adrian had gone from an aspiring tech mogul requesting a multi-million-dollar loan to accepting a janitorial position at his ex-wife's empire. The power dynamics between them had completely reversed, and he couldn't escape the bitter taste of humiliation. Adrian arrived at the Kingston Realty headquarters early the next day. He waited by the HR reception desk, shifting uncomfortably in his worn-out dress shoes. Before long, an HR representative handed him a blue jumpsuit and directed him toward the maintenance supervisor. He spent his first day learning how to clean offices, scrub floors, and empty trash cans. The plush carpets and marble floors he once casually strolled over as a high-powered CEO now stared back at him in mockery. Other employees gave him curious glances. Some whispered, recognizing him from the old days. A few even shot him pitying looks, remembering the flamboyant entrepreneur he used to be. By lunchtime, his back ached and sweat trickled down his temples. He stood in line at the employee cafeteria, a stark contrast from the five-star restaurants he once frequented. As he grabbed a sandwich, he spotted Sophia entering the cafeteria, surrounded by executives hanging on her every word. For a moment, their eyes met. Adrian, embarrassed, looked away. Sophia, unreadable, gave him a brief nod and continued her conversation. The gravity of his new position sank in deeper than ever. That evening, he returned to his cramped apartment, exhausted. Dropping onto his second-hand couch, he exhaled a long, shaky breath. He picked up his phone, thinking to call an old contact. But who would help him now? Most of his friends had either disappeared or sided with Vanessa the moment his finances dried up. Adrian closed his eyes, recalling the promise of his younger self. He'd always wanted to be on top, to be respected, to be in control of his destiny. Yet here he was, cleaning hallways in a building owned by the woman he had scorned. The sting of regret threatened to consume him. As Adrian adjusted to his janitorial duties, he occasionally spotted a striking young man visiting the executive floors. The tall, confident individual had an uncanny resemblance to Sophia, dark hair, the same thoughtful eyes, and a poise well beyond his years. One afternoon, as Adrian mopped the floor near Sophia's office, he noticed the young man entering. They spoke briefly, and she smiled at him warmly. Realization dawned on Adrian. This must be Leo, the son he had never bothered to meet. Adrian felt a twinge in his chest. He remembered how vehemently he had once declared he didn't want a child. Now, seeing Leo, no longer a toddler, but a bright young adult, stirred a confusing blend of regret, curiosity, and guilt. The door swung open, and Leo stepped out, nearly bumping into Adrian. They locked eyes. "Excuse me," Leo said politely, sidestepping. For a moment, Adrian wondered if Leo recognized him. But there was only polite indifference in his gaze. Adrian stammered, "Leo." Leo paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Do I know you?" Adrian swallowed hard. I'm Adrian. Before he could finish the sentence, Sophia stepped into the hallway. "Leo, are you ready for the meeting with the tech partners?" she asked, her tone shifting when she noticed Adrian. "We should go." Leo cast Adrian one last perplexed glance. "Right. Let's go, Mom." The two walked away, leaving Adrian behind with a heavy bucket of dirty water and a heart burdened by an emotion he had never felt so acutely before, remorse for the child he had turned his back on. Weeks passed. Adrian continued to clean floors and restock supplies, occasionally glimpsing Sophia in passing. He noticed how employees admired her leadership. She treated everyone, from custodians to vice presidents, with respect. It was a stark reminder of everything he had taken for granted. One Friday afternoon, Sophia's executive assistant approached Adrian. "Miss Kingston wants to see you in her office," she said briskly. Adrian's heart pounded. He had no idea what to expect. With trembling hands, he knocked on the heavy oak door before stepping inside. The office exuded power, floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive desk lined with awards, and elegant furnishings. Sophia sat behind the desk, scanning a file. She looked up. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair. Adrian complied, swallowing the lump in his throat. Her voice was calm but commanding. "I've reviewed your performance reports. You've been punctual, respectful, and you haven't caused any issues." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "I understand you're still hoping for a loan to rebuild your business. Is that correct?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. After a moment, he managed to speak. "Yes, I am. It's the only way I can start over." She leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "I'm willing to consider it if, and only if, you complete at least one full year in your current role. Prove to me that you can handle responsibility without running from your problems." Adrian's eyes stung. The old him would have found such conditions degrading. But humility had taught him a different perspective. "Thank you," he murmured. "I accept." Sophia nodded. "I also want to be clear. While I can forgive what you did to me, I can never forget it. We won't be friends, Adrian. This is a purely professional arrangement." "I understand," he said softly, standing to leave. Before he reached the door, she added, "And don't try to involve my son in this. Leo wants nothing to do with you." Her words stung, but Adrian understood he had forfeited any claim to fatherhood the day he abandoned them both. Now, all he could do was accept Sophia's terms and hope she would continue to show him a measure of mercy. Months later, Sophia was honored with the prestigious Entrepreneur of the Year award. The ceremony was a glittering affair, hosted at the city's Grand Convention Center. A who's who of business elites crowded the venue, eager to celebrate the self-made billionaire whose story had captured the public's imagination. Dressed in a sleek evening gown, Sophia walked on stage to thundering applause. Cameras flashed as she smiled, poised and radiant. In the front row sat Mrs. Kingston, who gave her a proud nod. Beside Mrs. Kingston was Leo, now young executive in training at Kingston Realty. He stood, applauding enthusiastically. Adrian was in the back of the auditorium, slumped in a seat, quietly observing. He had been assigned to help with logistics at the event, hauling boxes of programs, assisting with setup. He watched Sophia step up to the podium. Although he was far away, he could see how her eyes shone with gratitude and triumph. "Good evening," Sophia began, her voice resonating. "Years ago, I thought my world had ended. I was homeless, pregnant, and uncertain if I would even survive. But with determination, mentorship, and faith, I found my path. Tonight, I dedicate this award to everyone who has ever been told they can't. Because I'm living proof that you can." The crowd roared with approval. Adrian felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He remembered her as the kind, gentle wife he had dismissed, and now here she was, commanding the adoration of an entire industry. At the end of her speech, the lights dimmed slightly, and a massive screen behind her displayed a reel of her company's achievements, renovated buildings, thriving tech startups, philanthropic outreach. Among the clips was a shot of Leo cutting the ribbon at a brand new community center bearing the Kingston Realty logo. As the audience rose to its feet, giving Sophia a standing ovation, Adrian could only sit there, clapping quietly. He knew his applause meant nothing compared to the adoration she received from countless others. A bittersweet pang lodged in his heart. She had become everything he once claimed she could never be and more. After the ceremony, Sophia mingled with dignitaries, business moguls, and well-wishers. Adrian lingered on the sidelines, uncertain whether he should approach her. Part of him desperately wanted to apologize once more, to beg for even a sliver of personal forgiveness beyond the professional arrangement they had. When the crowd thinned out and Sophia finally had a moment's respite, Adrian mustered his courage. He walked over, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Sophia," he began quietly, "that was incredible." She regarded him coolly, still holding the award in her hand. "Thank you," she replied, her tone formal. He took a breath, tears threatening to spill. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I see now how wrong I was, how cruel. I wish I could take back the pain I caused." Sophia studied him for a long moment. In her eyes, Adrian saw not hatred, but a calm resolve. "There was a time when hearing that might have mattered," she finally said. "But now, the only thing that matters is that I've built a life without your help, and Leo has grown into a remarkable young man without a father." Adrian's head hung low. "I understand." She lifted her chin. "One piece of advice for you, Adrian. The best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's living so well that their cruelty no longer affects you. I've found success, but more importantly, I've found peace. If you truly want to make amends, rebuild your own life in a way that helps others instead of tearing them down." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Sophia gave a faint, sad smile and turned to rejoin the crowd. Adrian remained behind, alone. Yet, amidst the emptiness, a flicker of determination took root. Perhaps it wasn't too late to become a better man, even if he would never be part of Sophia's life again. For Sophia, stepping into her waiting limousine with Leo at her side, the night air felt electrifying. She glanced at her son, who smiled back, proud of all she had accomplished. In her heart, she knew that forgiving Adrian, while never forgetting, allowed her to close the darkest chapter of her life. She had found her own power in success and compassion, turning heartbreak into triumph. And there, as the limousine pulled away from the cheering crowds, Sophia felt the quiet satisfaction of a future that now belonged entirely to her and her son, free from the shadows of betrayal, and full of the promise that she alone had forged. The end.